Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And today I have a special guest, Jason van Tatenhove, who wrote this amazing book, The Perils of Extremism, How I Left the Oathkeepers and Why We Should Be Concerned About a Future Civil War. And Jason, this is our first time meeting each other, but I saw you at the January 6th committee testifying into 2022, I believe, and then a slew of interviews, and people wanted to know what was Stewart Rhodes like, and how could you ever become an Oathkeeper or involved with the Oathkeepers? I read your book, but we'll unpack it for our audience. But I guess I want to just give a little background to say you are not the typical right-wing extremist fascist type, militia type at all. You were a very cool, artistic, as self-professed queer tattoo artist and writer, and you loved Hunter Thompson and abstract expressionist movement artist, and wow, what a journey. And now you're involved with your own podcast and writing career at the Colorado Switchblade. So, my listeners know that I've been interested in right-wing extremism since I got out of the Moonies, because I was a right-wing extremist. But I think these days there's psychological warfare happening online and radicalization. Well, I think it's going to be a very interesting interview. Welcome to the Influence Continuum, Jason.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
I don't really fit the mold all that well. It was more of almost like a Chuck Palahniuk Fight Club sense of misadventure that kind of landed me in all of this, because I come from a very, very left household.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of raised by the remnants of the New York City beat writers and abstract expressionists and the hippies.
Right.
And moved out to Colorado when I was a younger kid. And then, I had moved up to Montana, and, I kind of got my start in media back in the early 90s as the art director of like the big underground music magazine in Denver. So I've kind of always, and I went to 3 different art schools. I dropped out of all of them. So I kind of have this curiosity, this sense of misadventure. And when I moved to Montana, I began being exposed to things like InfoWars and, harder right-wing media such as Rush Limbaugh, trying to reconnect with an estranged father. And, I thought it just was intriguing when Bundy Ranch happened. We saw thousands of people from all over the country organically go out to this small little rundown ranch in the middle of the desert, south of Las Vegas. And, leave their families, their jobs, bring guns, and get ready to square off with the federal government. And I was raised around Colorado State University right there in Fort Collins. And so, for me, I spent a lot of time watching independent documentaries at the student center there growing up. So that influenced me. I saw a lot of stuff, about Ruby Ridge and Waco. And those, the messaging that was being put out at the time was that this was going to be another Waco, that the family was in danger. And I think that kind of is what caught a lot of people's attention. So I had been doing another podcast in Colorado before I moved to Montana. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't have much going on. I had sold my tattoo shop. I was going to open a new tattoo shop up in Montana, but the business climate just wasn't the same. It wasn't going to be adequate to have a sustainable business model.
Right.
So I started podcasting again, and that's what led me. I made some calls, and it was Easter Sunday that weekend, the weekend of, and I wound up getting embedded in with Stewart Rhodes as an independent journalist. I was working for a small little internet outlet called Revolution Radio, kind of just doing talk radio. And so I was embedded in with him as he went down for the second part of that, and then started getting, and I sold my wife on this. I had was working through the Hunter S. Thompson's Omnibus, and I just finished Hell's Angels for the second time, and I felt very much like this was something historic happening, and this could be my chance to do a Hell's Angels novel.
Yeah.
Kind of my version of it and updated for today's world. And I got just unprecedented inside access,
Hmm.
and I was invited back to the next three standoffs,
Yep.
and wound up being asked to be the national media director after I lost my job, um, working for
National
the
media director of the Oathkeepers.
yeah.
All
I mean,
right.
so
Who knew?
yeah, and I'll be honest with you too. I was making good money.
Yeah, well, I
You know,
wanted to comment. So let me just say, if I may, and just for my listeners, I always talk about how people are especially vulnerable during moments in their life cycle when they're off balance. So, death of a loved one, illness, divorce, losing a job, moving to a new city, state, or country. They're going to be more open to new friends, new opportunities, and often it starts with something where you're getting paid or an opportunity that then incrementally morphs. And the more you get involved, then you start changing your clothing, as you said in your book, and probably adopting some of the language styles because you were hanging out with the guys, and they were using your expertise as a media person. That's why, Stuart Rhodes saw someone who would be a good vehicle to propagandize for him.
yeah, and at the time, I certainly would be the last person to say I was in a vulnerable state, but I was. Looking
Right.
back now, and having learned what I have from, I'm a consultant with Georgetown Law's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, and
Mm-hmm.
so I've been fortunate to be able to go travel all over the country and speak, but I also get to listen to some of the top experts in the field of extremism. And I've learned so much over the past year of doing that work that, I really, now I can look back and say I was in a vulnerable position. My wife her health had taken a turn for the worse. She had been, chronically ill since we got together 20 years ago, but, ultimately she was not getting better, and unfortunately she did pass away this spring.
My
But
condolences. I'm sorry.
oh, it's okay. It's part of life. Um,
It is. I lost a wife. I actually can identify with your
but as
loss.
far as well, thank you. And as far as the pay goes, it was the first time in a long time that the Christmas that I was working for the Oathkeepers, that I didn't have to choose between presents for our daughters and medication for my wife.
Mm.
And that's, unfortunately, that's getting worse. And I've worked, um, standard legitimate journalism jobs. Unfortunately, they're becoming less and less viable to be able to support a family and just make a living in today's world with the advent of where local journalism's gone, and that plays in a part too.
Absolutely. I mean, they're laying off people from the newsroom of the Washington Post because, you can't make money legitimately being an independent journalist if the billionaires that are buying up these big entities have an agenda, whether it's pushing fossil fuels or libertarian ideology or whatever. They are crafting the information flow, and that's that information flow that influences our minds because we're human beings and we're totally dependent on each other, but also on information that has, some verifiability.
Yeah,
And so many people forget, journalistic standards are getting to independent, sources for a comment, and not, and also independent journalism is not doing false equivalences. Well, we have 98% of those climate scientists that say there is global warming due to humans, and 2% that say, oh, it's not so sure. So let's give them equal time. What?
Well, and
Equal time?
I think and unfortunately that discredits journalism on the whole, because you can look out your window. I live in the mountains of Colorado, where I've had summers where we were evacuated 3 different times for wildfire issues that we hadn't had historically. And all we have to do more and more is just look out the window, if we still have a window to look out from,
Right.
to see the world is burning and climate is drastically changing.
Right, exactly. But it's so I'm going to take a moment, if you don't mind, Jason, and just share one of the things I often like to teach my clients and when I'm teaching clinicians about the Ash conformity study. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not, no.
So Solomon Asch was a social psychologist, and in the 50s, he came up with an experiment, a social psychology experiment. He would have the teacher hold up a placard with a sample-sized line and 3 lines of different sizes. He'd have students in a horseshoe, all in on the experiment except for one person.
Okay.
And the question he would ask is, which of the 3 lines is the same size as the sample line, right? And they would go around twice, correctly identifying the number, and then they'd all start giving the wrong answer. And so the question was, even though you can see with your own eyes, how many people will start giving the wrong answer just because everyone else is? And the magic number is 2/3 start giving the wrong answer. And the ones that stick to their guns and are called heroic resistors, even when they're giving the right answer, they're like squirming in pain because they don't want to be rejected by everybody or think that they're crazy or stupid, because a 3-inch line is a 3-inch line. But
Right.
this
And
is,
you can see it with your own eyes.
you
But
can see it, but that's why when you were talking about just look out your window if you have a window and things are getting hot and burning and this and that, it's like, because we are looking at whoever we're identifying with, and if everybody's saying there's no global climate warming, then there's no global climate warming, except your house is being flooded, or
yeah,
wildfires are happening.
and I think this plays into extremism as well. I mean, um, I having seen from the inside out and helped produce some of this propaganda. I mean, there's a formula to it, and it has everything to do with. I think we're very much still affected largely by survival instinct. Primate survival instinct, tribalism, and just our emotional reactions to things. Edward Bernays, who was Freud's nephew,
I
wrote the
wrote
book.
about him in The Cult of Trump as the
Yeah,
foundation of this.
I mentioned it in my book as well.
Yes.
The his book, Propaganda.
Propaganda. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that was
1928.
the playbook that was used, and that was a book that to this day I have on my desk, so I can show people in interviews, journalists, and such. Look, this is part of the formula, and these people are exploiting our nature, our hardwiring.
Yep.
And the easiest way to do that is to whip up the low hanging fruit, which is anger and outrage and frustration,
Yep.
because it disconnects our critical thinking skills. It's kind of a cognitive dissonance that happens, and
Exactly.
it doesn't matter what the truth is anymore. And I think we need to reclaim that weaponization, but use it on the part of putting out truth and putting out, verified information and sources. I think that it's being used to decent effect. I mean, they're not great storytellers, but they're putting it out in mass. And that we have plenty of great storytellers that are on the side of sanity and empathy and human connection. But we've got to up our game. I come
Yeah.
to this as from the perspective of a storyteller. So
1000%. So, I want to amplify your voice, and I'm a former member, survivor of an extremist cult, and I interview many because I want the public to understand we're not stupid. We're not uneducated. We got hacked. We were trusting the wrong people with the wrong sources, and our minds got taken over. But there's still hope for people to go, you know what? I can leave. I don't need to live in this dissonance between my real self and my conscience and what the ideology is of the group that I've been a member of for a few years.
And I think America right now needs some exit ramps. We need to, needs to be okay for people to say, "Oh, I got sucked in," and you know what, I'm not happy with the direction things are going, and I want to get back to who I was.
Exactly.
We're so divided. I think we need to, and I mentioned that during my testimony before Congress was, I think cult deprogramming techniques. I think that we've grappled with
This is
similar
me.
things. Yeah, and I think that's part of the answer. I think there is no just one answer, and there's going to be no just sweeping government reform. It's going to be little actions done on a tsunami level by all of us in our own spheres of influence, our own families, our own communities.
We're on the same page, my friend. I would refer to it as a complex systems approach, where we're creating networks of many inter influencers. If we have bigger influences, it's even better. But from the bottom up, but also from the top down, if we can, from official sources, from major media sources, etc. But it's an epidemic of mind control virus is going around, and it's coming largely through the digital space. It's still
Well, and we
coming
haven't
over
seen
TV, but
anything yet, really, as far as how the role AI is playing, because it's already playing. It's already entrenched. We don't even realize how much so. And that propaganda. We saw the first little tip of the iceberg with the spoof call, the deep fake voice of Joe Biden asking people not to vote for in New Hampshire, I believe it
oh,
was.
I go back earlier. I was actually part of a research project on countering ISIS recruitment online in 2015. And there was AI being used back then. And the researchers, when they were a researcher, when he was presenting to an Aspen Institute gathering of very high officials and substantial people, said, think STDs. And we were like, what? And he said, the more sex you have with someone who has syphilis, the more likely you are to get it. He said, that's how to understand how ISIS is recruiting. They're identifying a person, and maybe they're playing a video game or in a matchmaking site or some many of front groups, and they get to know them, and then they start incrementally grooming them, introducing them to new friends, some of
To
whom
build a
pretend
community, false sense of
building
community.
community,
Yeah,
exactly, and a solution to loneliness and meaning and hope. People want to feel hope.
yeah.
And as you said, when there's so much emphasis on fear and distrust and angst, people are going to be more likely to follow certainty. Someone who says, "I know the truth. Trust me. I know more than the generals. I know more than the economists. I have no training. I haven't read a real book in my whole life, but trust me. I know this." It's like, okay. But back to your story. I'm so happy to hear that you're going around giving talks because, again, the public needs to understand having this frame of they're stupid, they're brainwashed, nothing can ever get them out of it, don't bother, or trying to argue with facts. It just is counterproductive. Understanding how the mind works, how they recruit and indoctrinate, and how to ask respectful questions to try to help people get in touch with their conscience and their critical thinking and their values. Who were they before?
Yeah.
And you
I,
mentioned earlier the importance of your children and your wife. And I always like to recommend think of the children, think of your nephews and nieces if you don't have children. Um, for their sake,
yeah.
we need to come back to lying is bad.
Yeah.
Don't do to others what you don't want done to you.
Well,
Yeah.
I think of a lot. I think a lot these days about what the world is going to look like that my daughters will inherit.
Hmm.
I even go so far as to question if I knew back when we decided to have a family where the world would so suddenly turn, would I still choose to do it? But I often frame it when I'm talking in interviews and such. I think of it, and I think it's good to break this down into kind of cultural mythologies, because storytelling is such a powerful tool. It's how we relate to the world. We're a species that's just hardwired for storytelling. And some of our earliest memories are often of a parent teaching a child about the world through storytelling. We consume our news, we consume our view of the universe and our place in it through storytelling. So a
Exactly.
good cultural, for me, alliteration would be: do I want my daughters to inherit the world of Star Wars or Star Trek? Because they
I
are
like that.
kind of radically different. Um,
I'm a
you know,
tricker,
yeah,
Trekkie.
and that's what wins out for me.
Yeah,
The one where we're solving our social issues, where we are looking to strive to move forward and explore together and see what we can build, together. That's the world I want. I
yep,
don't necessarily want the falling republic and empire and all of that. While it makes for great storytelling, it's not necessarily the world I want my daughters to inherit. So,
not at all. I totally agree. Quick fun story. Have you heard of the Borg?
yeah, yeah.
So the showrunner, the producer of Next Generation, read my first book, Combating Cult Mind Control. We met, and he created the Borg, and has the metaphor of an authoritarian cult where
Yeah.
people are just following the hive and
The Borg
the
Queen, yeah.
the queen. Exactly.
Well, yeah. Again, storytelling is such a powerful tool that I talk to a lot of USAs and district attorneys and state political leaders and such. And while we do need the triage of legal action and trying to preserve democracy, because right now I really believe personally that we may see democracy disappear as far as we know it within the next year. And historically, I mean, that's obviously something that's happened before.
Right.
So I think we're very much on a crossroads, and we need to take it very seriously. But we also have to look at how we got to this place how we got here in the first place. And I think it all starts and ends with storytelling and the stories we're consuming. When someone like Alex Jones, who is talking about the things he has audiences, even deplatformed that dwarf mainstream media.
Yep.
We have to look at that and analyze it and pick it apart and understand why that is, and how we can kind of reclaim some of that storytelling.
Yep. So there's so much more to talk about, but I guess I want to just take a moment to educate you, if I may, that my former cult, the Sons of Sun Myung Moon, now deceased Messiah, one of them has a gun cult in Pennsylvania
I
called the
saw that.
Rod of Iron Ministries. Another one has a gun factory making AR-15s and Thompson submachine guns, and as well as car arms, pistols, and such. They have two training compounds, one in Tennessee and one near Waco, Texas. And they're using vets to train people how to kill in a civil war.
And
And I
this is
know,
something that's been going on for a long time. My experience with it is more related up to the Pacific Northwest area, but there's a whole cottage industry of combat vets you know who have, while they may not buy directly into the messaging, at least at the time I was involved with things. And keep in mind, this is 8 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was involved. I walked away kind of right as they began to shift from just merely anti-government to courting actual racists and Nazis. And that,
yep,
for me, I can get behind being skeptical of the government. My views have certainly evolved since then, but I think historically, we should be, and we should be holding them to account. But America's the best thing we got going, and no one's coming to save us, so we have to save ourselves, but there's this entire industry of, and part of it is we've treated our veterans poorly. We really
Yes.
have.
Yes.
And, when you have someone like a Stuart Rhodes or some of these other charismatic leaders who come along and, they're building this community, and it's just like the skinheads on the playgrounds of the 80s, finding the one kid that didn't fit in,
Mm.
that obviously had, a very nightmarish family life, and coming and saying, hey, we have this community. We're going to be your family.
Yep.
The same thing's happening. It's just, it's evolved,
Yep.
they're finding these veterans and these first responders are just average people whose lives are not necessarily going how they would have hoped.
Right.
Myself included at the time, and saying, hey, we've got something exciting. We've got a community, and even more so, we have something, a mission for you to do that's going to be reminiscent of your military team experience, that same camaraderie.
Yep.
And the mission is vitally important to America.
Right.
You are going to be
The
our hero.
cause, the bigger mission.
Yeah. And when that happens, of course it sucks people in. So, we do have these communities where they are actively training. And, that's, I made the mistake early on. We had a lot of guys that were not physically fit, older, and that's still very much the case. But, as things evolve, they're going to become sharper. They're going to become, we're already seeing the children who are radicalized earlier on now they're growing up, and now they're learning the lessons, they have been given the blueprints,
Right.
and now it's their turn to take the leadership role, and a lot of times these people are much more willing to lead from the front. I mean, we knew with Stuart Rhodes, he was a Yale educated attorney. He was not going to cross certain legal lines. He was always going to be behind police lines. But moving forward, that's not necessarily going to be the case. And then you have people that have been raised in situations like the Bundys, where they were raised to believe that they are part of the prophets of the Latter-day Saints that are going to save America.
Right.
So there's a true believer faction. And, I think things are going to get leaner and meaner, and already are in front of our eyes as time goes on.
Yep, exactly. And so, I mean, there's so much I can comment on, but we're resonating completely. I agree with you. But I'm all about doing what I can to educate people as a mental health professional who studied brainwashing and mind control for all these decades. There really are patterns, and psychoeducation, for example, my influence continuum. Is that something you've heard of, other than the title of this
I've,
podcast?
I've, I've heard the podcast. I've seen the titles of your books.
It's very briefly, it's a very easy to understand chart. People can download it on Freedom of Mind. But think about influence from healthy to unhealthy, right? Unhealthy
Okay.
is authoritarian. Here's your authentic self, compassion, conscience, critical thinking, free will, all the way to controlling a behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make a pseudo identity that's part of the group based on dogma and hate and solemnity and dependency and obedience. And so teaching people, hey, like somebody was asking me earlier, Taylor Swift, is it a cult? And I'm like, yeah, but it's a healthy cult. People choose to, know all of her songs and every single word of every single song and pay extraordinary large amounts of money to go hear her perform. But nobody's coercing them. Nobody's lying to them. There's no misrepresentation. They're not undermining anyone's conscience, and they're
Yeah,
not
she's not
threatening.
telling people to get their guns and let's go square off against so and so.
Exactly. So I say, being part of a community is great. Like, I belong to a number of different communities. I'm a scuba diver. Anywhere I go, if I mention that and they're like, "Oh, you dive? Where's your favorite places? And what kind of gear do you use?" And you can get into a whole thing. It's just normal and healthy and great. And I'm Jewish. I belong to a progressive Jewish temple, gay friendly, woman rabbi. Um, but I like being in a community and celebrating people's achievements. And if they lose a loved one, console them.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So I've talked a lot about, how we need to look towards some of the techniques you're talking about. I'm a layperson, I dropped out of art schools. So I just come to it from my own personal experience. But what advice would you give to someone who has a family member, or, has someone they're working with? Maybe that's someone in a judicial role that's looking to, try to foster that exit ramp, to kind of engage some of what you're talking about. How can people begin to help de-radicalize those people that are in their lives that maybe started drinking the Kool-Aid?
Great question. So I'll start by just saying I went and did my doctoral dissertation a few years ago. I got my doctorate in 2020 because I realized the law itself is out of date by 100 years on understanding how the human mind works. There's not a clear scientific way to evaluate undue influence. The law says if you're under 18, you can be unduly influenced, or if you're elderly with dementia, but everything else is a slippery slope. And with my bite model, I did a scientific research study, and it was recently validated that the more you can control these variables, behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, you can control people's personalities, beliefs, and their behavior and their minds. So that's one piece of it. But to answer your question, there are do's and there are don'ts. I'll start with the don'ts. What doesn't work ever with someone who's been programmed is attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the policy head on, because it activates their cult identity. It gets defensive. It feels like you're being persecuted, you're evil, and the person will distance. So that's what you don't want to do. You don't try to argue, call names, try to, force facts. Can't you see the facts? 40 cases that said, Biden won the election, 40, but that does not work. So don't do it. And to try to teach people, pay attention. If you try something and it doesn't work, don't keep doing what doesn't work. Try a different way. So what's the different way? What I've found is warmth, respect, kindness, compassion, active listening. And if you're concerned about a family member or an old friend, you have to understand there's the real person's identity and their programmed identity. And you want to talk to their real identity. So that implies getting them to remember before they got radicalized, good times they had with you. Remember when we went to the Cowboys game? Remember when we did this? We went fishing. Here's some photos. Here's some videos, because that's going to activate the person's real self. Okay.
Reconnect those memories based on a positive emotion.
Exactly. But what a big problem, and I've been trying my best to message this in the last 8 years, the worst thing you can do is block your relative, mute them, cut them out, not invite them to Thanksgiving dinner. But a lot of people do it because they say, I can't stand it. They're trying to proselytize to me all the time. But I say, I miss you. I want you in my life. Can we put politics aside and just, be friends, or be my brother, be my uncle, whatever. So there's a process to rebuild that connection, that warm connection. And once you're building that, then you can start asking questions, but with a respectful, curious approach. And what you want to do is ask them what they think of pimps and traffickers, for example. How do pimps operate? I've been looking into it, you can say. And I've done many things on trafficking, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So the bite model really works with that. But you can shift their attention to something they identify as bad and explain mind control as how it's done on people, or Chinese communist brainwashing, which is what helped explain it to me, that got me deprogrammed from the Moonies back in 76. So not a frontal approach, attack. Talk about case examples and ask their opinions about how people can adopt crazy beliefs or submit their will and their conscience to somebody else. Or the Ash conformity study. You're curious. Let me show you this video from the 60s with this guy. What do you think of people who are saying a 3-inch line is a 2-inch line just to fit in?
Yeah.
Almost
But
everyone will say, "Oh, I would never do that," but 2/3 will. But
yeah.
you're educating them about, the popular thing is not necessarily the true thing,
Yeah.
right?
And that actually reaffirms everything I've been trying to tell people. I just got to it from another way. But yeah, I think it's super important that we can't just not talk to crazy Uncle Bob anymore. We
Right.
have to include him. He's one of ours. He's one of our family. He's one of
Exactly.
our community. And so I always
Don't
approach
call
it
him
with, "How are
Crazy
you doing?"
Bob.
Yeah, yeah.
Not to his face, anyway.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and we probably shouldn't have been behind his back, but
Correct.
that's how that's the world we're living in right now. So,
Right.
but we need to get to a better place. So, this is how we do it.
Yeah, exactly. And then what people have complained to me about is that their loved one who's been radicalized is trying to shove it down their throat and saying, "Do the research," and then they get 50 YouTube links or something. And I say, you know what? Let's make a deal. Let's agree that we care about each other, we respect each other, and we're going to both pursue truth. And I'm saying to you, oh, radicalized person, you're not going to tell them that, but I'm saying to you, I'm willing to change my mind if you have convincing evidence. But help me understand your journey. Go back in your mind to when you first heard about Donald Trump. What's your earliest memory? Oh, he was cheating on his wife. Oh, so what'd you think of him then? Oh, I thought he was a jerk and an asshole. Oh, interesting. What was the next memory you have? Oh, and The Apprentice. What'd you think of? What a blowhard, but, billionaire. Okay, that's interesting. So tell me, how did you come to believe that he was presidential, material?
Yeah,
And get people to remember they were watching Fox News, listening to Rush Limbaugh. What were the things my buddy at work was telling me, on and on and on and on. But get them to realize they went from not liking Trump to now. Like, let's unpack that. And what I recommend is make a deal with them. You take one thing that was persuasive to you in terms of your belief system. Let's watch it. If it's a video against COVID vaccines or whatever, and let's critique it together and talk about it. Then it'll be my turn to show a video. You'll watch it with me and we'll critique it together. And we'll just keep going back and forth because we both care about each other and there must be some evidence based answer. It's not two realities. And furthermore, there's no such thing as alternative facts. There are facts and there's lies, or there's facts and there's misinformation.
so let me ask you another question. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I have a doctor that I right now that I can
Pleasure.
talk to and pick your mind, because I just kind of
Well, you're a
go on my own here.
journalist. You're
Yeah.
you're programmed to want to ask questions, right? Go for
Yes.
it.
So I know that in my experience, I refer to my love-hate relationship with conspiracy theory as being very much like a heroin addiction.
Hmm.
As someone who has recovered from heroin and been there, it feels very similar to me. And it seems like America as a whole, we love conspiracy theory. What is it about the notion of conspiracy theory that is so intriguing to us as human beings. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. I've done a lot of thinking about that. And a book that I read, I don't know, a bunch of years back when I was researching the cult of Trump was The Republic of Lies. That was very interesting about the history of propaganda and conspiracy theories. It went back all the way to the founding of our country, interestingly. I also interviewed Michael Shermer, who wrote a book on conspiracy theories. He's with the Skeptical Inquirer folks, the scientific folks. But to answer your question, whenever there's a lot of economic uncertainty, stress, anxiety, worry, people want to have a story that can explain it, and not a complicated story, a simple story. And so the framing of a conspiracy theory is there's some entity out there, the Illuminati, the elders of the protocols of Zion, which is a Russian propaganda document that we know is BS, but has been recirculated in QAnon, etc. But we want to we want to have hope. We want to have security. We want to have certainty. So that's what I think is appealing to the underlying emotional elements of things. But what I liked about my interview with Michael Shermer in his book was he said, Steve, there are real conspiracies. Like it's a mistake to say everything is a conspiracy theory because the presidents knew the Vietnam War was not winning, and we kept killing innocent civilians and Americans, veterans, etc. And it was a conspiracy to keep it going on and on and on and on.
And
And
I think it's a double-edged sword of us. Like as we're raised, we're taught we're supposed to be open-minded. We're supposed to be inquisitive. We're supposed to, you know, be open to what the truth may be. But I think it also ties back to, and I put it into the allegory of there was a point in time, you know, mythologically kind of where we were sitting around a fire in the dark. And there were great unknown beasts around us. And, we spent that time around the fire trying to soothe each other, to keep us around the fire where, the predators weren't going to pull one of us off. So I almost feel like it's almost that kind of survival instinct gone a little haywire over time
oh
as
no,
well.
I think when I recently reread Harari's book *Sapiens*. I don't know if you've read it, but it's really a worthwhile historical read of our species and our development. And he talks about the fact that we developed language so we could do storytelling. So we could say, hey, the good food is over there. Don't go over there. There's a predator. And we would get vicarious experiences by hearing people's tell tales. Well, I went over there and this big cat jumped on me and da 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 da. And you read the emotions of the person telling the story and you start feeling those emotions
Yeah.
so that it motivates you to be like, that's really dangerous. I don't want to go there. So, I mean, there's a real survival evolutionary quality and importance to storytelling. But, I'll just talk about some toxic stories that a lot of people believe, like the world is coming to an end. So the Judgment Day and Armageddon is coming. And so, therefore, it doesn't matter what we do to protect our planet because God's going to wipe it all away and remake it. That's a dangerous story.
It's a
Likewise,
self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point.
exactly. And then there are the billionaires in Silicon Valley that are like, well, the Earth is a lost cause anyway, so we need to figure out a way to put our consciousness in androids and go to other planets. And that's the future of the human species. And that's as crazy a
I think if
story.
just one of those billionaires would be serious about fixing the planet, we could make a major dent. in just getting things back on track. But no one seems to be the one to step up.
I've been waiting for my angel to show up, talking, doing podcasts, going on TV, etc. It hasn't happened yet, but um, the truth is the truth, and mind control is a reality, even though, like the tobacco industry hired people to say, no, there's no proof that cancer is caused by smoking cigarettes. That was disinformation campaign. There's no such thing as global climate change. My former cult was the Center for Client Science Denial for 50 years. I learned recently from a book. Um, and so the critical thing is, in my opinion, in 2024, we need to be thinking about planetary survival and working backwards from where we are now and what we need to do to save our planet. And it's not state by state or one country against another country. We're on one biosphere. If a nuclear bomb goes off, the radiation goes everywhere.
Yeah,
You know,
we're in one big fishbowl.
We're putting it nanoplastics in our oceans. We're eating the fish. It's going in our bodies. It's killing us. It affects us all. We need to
And no
start.
one's coming to save us but us. Like we've got to start listening to the smart people and empowering them. We've got to just.
And
You said it
science
earlier.
matters.
Yeah, it does.
Science matters. But what I want to also say for our listeners is that there's a big difference if you really understand the scientific method. They never say they know something is the truth with a capital T or it's inerrant. They say we have a hypothesis and we do tests and we're ready to abandon the hypothesis if there's a better hypothesis that has the proof that it works better to explain the phenomenon. So when you're doing the scientific method, you're open, you should be open to evolving, changing, recognizing, versus I have the truth, and you only go through life confirming what you already believe and ignore all the evidence. And what happens is your life gets narrower and narrower as you go on because you're not learning any new perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I want to learn. I'm a junkie. If you talk about, being hooked, I love reading books. I love talking to interesting people, and not just people I agree with. In this case, I agree with you almost totally. So far, there's nothing.
I'm sure we can find a few things.
I don't like tattoos. Okay, for myself.
I got enough for both of us.
It's for myself. But anyway, no. I mean, the thing is we need to think about the future, be present centered, and for those of us who wake up and get out of a mind control bubble, we didn't know what we didn't know back then, and it's a question that I ask all my clients. I say, if you go back in time to when you first got that gig, knowing what you know now, would you say or do anything differently?
I probably would have approached things differently, but I went in to write a book. That was my initial thing. And yes, I got sucked in and I got radicalized, but I finally wrote that book, and it opened up this life that I had been trying to do. Now I got out of it, and I was lucky to get out of it. And I went through the process of looking at myself in the mirror, and my hair had changed, my clothes had changed, my vernacular had changed.
Right.
Like, who have I become?
Right.
I don't know. I like my life journey right now. And if I've done anything different,
the important thing is you're out, right? But for some people,
and now I can educate
stuck,
too.
They're stuck in. And when I ask them to think back, once they learn about brainwashing and mind control, and they talk to critics and former members and ask them to go back, they're like, no, I don't think I ever would have joined. I wouldn't have gone to that free dinner or that, personality test or, that free lecture. But for me, that's about rewiring your own mind based on knowledge and not just feeling guilty or ashamed that somebody lied to you or tricked you, co-opted your will and got you to do things that you're ashamed and embarrassed about. But for me, I'm a minimalist. I want to empower people to make up their own minds on things in their life journey and take whatever I have to say that's helpful and use it and ignore the rest.
I just wrote a piece 2 days ago called "I Love Losers," talking about how, with all the messaging we're hearing, the chest thumping and you know, I'm not going to be a loser and I don't like losers, whether they're veterans that have paid the ultimate price or not. I think I really believe that in order to succeed in life, truly, failure is part of that equation. If we look at people like Steve Jobs or even Abraham Lincoln, who I focus in on, and Keanu Reeves in the piece, you know, failure and learning is an integral part of real human growth. And then recognizing it for what it is. Yeah, you failed, but you learned these lessons. These doors were opened that you didn't even know they existed because you failed and because you stood back up, you got out of the mud, and you went through another door. You
Yeah.
tried something different.
Yep.
So, I think we need to rethink that paradigm in modern American culture where failure is bad. And I don't want these veterans that have, are disfigured and paid a heavy price for our freedoms. I don't even want to see them like that. That's just bizarrely wrong for me and just shows me that there's some deeper issues going on in the former president.
Yep.
That, we need to embrace and enshrine failure because that's how we truly learn.
Yep. I couldn't agree more with you. I would tell you that almost every major entrepreneur has many stories of non-successful startups, ideas that never went anywhere. But it was part of the learning. The key thing is not giving up. And I wanted to cite Edison, who worked for years to develop the incandescent bulb. And when asked, you've done 3,000 experiments and, none of them worked. Don't you feel terrible? He's like, no, I found 3,000 ways that you can't make an incandescent light bulb. That's the mindset of somebody who's an inventor who wants to innovate and think outside the box and contribute to society and such. So, and I also would rail against perfectionism.
Yeah, we're human. We're never going to get it right.
Yeah,
and
but
anyone who says it's perfect, they're selling you something.
exactly. Anyone who tries to have an image that's perfect, it's like, what's the shadow of that person over there if they don't admit that they have failings and they screwed up and other things, right? So, yes, we're all human and we shouldn't be in a relationship of guilt or shame with our own ambitions and goals. We should be like, I look at life as a journey and I'm going to try a lot of different things out and see what really resonates for me and what works.
Yeah, I think we have to. And I think a wonderful thing happens when you own your fuck ups, when you own your imperfections and just, and I found, when the most historic congressional investigation of our generation comes and asks you to testify, it's a scary experience. There is no idiot's guide on YouTube as to how to navigate that. But I came to the conclusion that I just have to own everything.
Yeah, just be
And
honest.
once you own everything, the universe seems to blossom around you. That there, because people are so scared that, oh, this is going to get out, that's going to get out. That's why I have no problem saying, sure, I'm queer, sure, I've been a heroin junkie, sure, I used to be the propagandist for the largest paramilitary organization in America. But you know what? I'm also me now, and I like the direction that my life has gone, and all those experiences have led me to the strength that I have now, which has allowed me to get through my wife of 30 years is passing, and,
Sure.
be the best father I can for my daughters and try to fix the world for them. But I think everyone, we should be proud of our failures and our struggles, and even nationally, like, America is not perfect,
Right.
you know,
For
but
sure.
we're grappling.
Yep.
We are working on civil rights. We are working on human rights, whether it's suffrage or LGBTQ plus or racial relations. We are by no means perfect, but we are actively grappling with trying to become better.
Yep.
And that, I think, is what makes America great. And we've got to keep up that grappling, or all of the progress that, my grandparents and your grandparents and all of our grandparents and parents, and, lines all the way. I could trace part of my family back to the second supply ship of Jamestown. The
Right.
other side, I can trace to my grandfather jumping ship
I read that in your book.
outside of New York City and swimming.
Yeah.
Literal, he didn't think he was going to make the cut. So, we're going to lose all of that very quickly if we do not continue that grappling. And it's painful and it's ugly, and it's not easy, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, my roots are immigrants as well. And of course, Trump's family name is Drumpf. Did you know that?
I did not.
Trumpf.
Hmm.
And they changed it to Trump.
Hmm.
But can you imagine people walking around? I have a hat, actually, because I learned about this from the comedian John Oliver. He did a
Yeah.
show, Let's Make Donald Drumpf Again. This was before he became president. And I
Yeah.
said, I'm going to buy a hat. I'm going to wear that one. That's good. Um, but I want to just jump back on what you were just saying about owning everything, being honest. No one's perfect. But I want to congratulate you because you're contributing to society with your knowledge, with your life experience. You're writing things. You have a podcast, which I've listened to. You're doing good. So
Well, I'm trying. I mean, I don't. I hear people say that. Yes, I know that. You know, many people have heard what I'm saying, but you understand, I'm in a bubble. I live up in the mountains. I mostly work out on my bedroom in my pajamas. So it's a surreal experience to go from being unknown
yeah,
to saying you have an influence. That's something that I'm still wrapping my head around. And imposter syndrome is a very real thing.
yeah.
My next two speaking gigs will be with the National Holocaust Museum.
Mm.
So that to me, I can begin to wrap my head around. Yeah, you're having an impact. Your words, people are listening to them, but still every day I'm like, no one reads my shit. It's just the
Well,
struggle's real.
okay, but
But I keep trying. I'm going to keep going,
there,
even if
there,
I don't see
there
it.
is life after imposter syndrome. One doesn't need to go through one's life thinking that you're not valid as you are. That's you can work on that. Let me encourage you as a therapist, like that's fixable. But again, I come back to life is what you choose to do. And when we're living in such wrought times with so much fear and polarization, taking a stand for what is factual, taking a stand on what is true, saying, let's not give up for the sake of my daughters. I'm going to keep plugging because I want to be a good role model and I want to do the best to make society work for them and give them the best leg up that I can possibly give. These are all important, valid, and what we don't want is to let foreign actors from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea convince us that elections mean nothing, we shouldn't bother to vote, that's hopeless, and there's going to be civil war. We're not going to give in, and we're not going to get just violent to equivocate violence as a solution. There's a higher road here, and it's very interesting. I read Rachel Maddow's latest book. Um, I'm blocking at the moment. It was based on her podcast Ultra. It was a recent book, and she basically talked about how the Nazis had an organization keeping America out of World War II, paid for by Hitler, co-opted congressmen and senators. Charles Copeland, the Catholic priest, had millions of
Yeah.
listeners in the
Yeah.
radio. And they had a plan to do a physical coup to stop America from joining the war. And it was citizens just standing up, doing the right thing, even though they were risking their career and they were risking getting harassed or threatened, that stood up and blew the whistle and exposed the plot and
Well,
stopped.
I think the real sleeping giant in America, they talk about how the sleeping giant is conservative America. I think that's wrong. I think the sleeping giant is those of us who, regardless of which side of the spectrum we find ourselves on, who believe that violence isn't the answer, who believe in democratic norms and equality and the things that make America America, or supposed to anyway. Um, they're the sleeping giants. And in the end, I have hope that, the next election, we will do the right things to keep this grand experiment moving forward, that the real sleeping giant are those of us that are just centrist and sane and thinking
I
that
love it. We are the sleeping giants. There are way more of us than the extremes on the left or the right. And I'm going to hold up your book one more time for those who are watching the video, The Perils of Extremism, How I Left the Oathkeepers, and Why We Should Be Concerned About a Future Civil War. Jason Van Tatenhove, thank you for being you. Pleasure to meet you. And continued success.
Thanks for having me on.
Yep, thank you. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the Super Thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind. Only you should control it.